war with the U.S. is talking about President Trump's foreign policy, and I do want to talking about President Trump's foreign policy, and I do want to stick with that topic here as we are now at 9:02 on the East Coast and 6:02 on the West Coast. Take a look at this here as Iran's president saying this weekend that his country is in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. The remarks by President Masoud Pezeshkian were published on the website of the country's supreme leader, Khamenei. He says, in part, quote, "We are in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They don't want our country to remain stable." Now, this was just a portion of this and is a much larger statement talking about President Trump's foreign policy, and I do want to stick with that topic here as we are now at 9:02 on the East Coast and 6:02 on the West Coast. Take a look at this here as Iran's president saying this weekend that his country is in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. The remarks by President talking about President Trump's foreign policy, and I do want to stick with that topic here as we are now at 9:02 on the East Coast and 6:02 on the West Coast. Take a look at this here as Iran's president saying this weekend that his country is in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. The remarks by President Masoud Pezeshkian were published on the website of the country's supreme leader, Khamenei. He says, in part, quote, "We are in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They don't want our country to remain stable." Now, this was just a portion of this and is a much larger statement that was made. Now, I want to pop this up on your screen as well, a live look over Mar-a-Lago as these remarks come just ahead of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's meeting with President Trump there in Florida tomorrow. Talking about President Trump's foreign policy, and I do want to stick with that topic here as we are now at 9:02 on the East Coast and 6:02 on the West Coast. Take a look at this here as Iran's president saying this weekend that his country is in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. The remarks by President Masoud Pezeshkian were published on the website of the country's supreme leader, Khamenei. He says, in part, quote, "We are in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They don't want our country to remain stable." Now, this was just a portion of this and is a much larger statement that was made. Now, I want to pop this up on your screen as well, a live look over Mar-a-Lago as these remarks come just ahead of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's meeting with President Trump there in Florida tomorrow. Iran's president also quoted as saying this war is worse than his country's deadly war with Iraq that was back in the 1980s. To help break down exactly what this means, I do want to bring in a friend of the show. We do have Javed Ali, Associate Professor of Practice at the University of Michigan's Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy and a former senior U.S. government counterterrorism official. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us.
Discover Redbreast, the world's most awarded single pot still Irish whiskey. Redbreast, quite the find.
Meet our TurboTax experts in person and let them do your taxes for you. Now this is Taxes.
Josh, nice to be with you and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. And I did want to ask you here first. We saw that quote, of course, translated there, and essentially it translates to quote-unquote full-scale war. What do you make of that, and what does Iran's president mean that there is a full-scale war with the U.S. and allies?
So, Josh, really interesting set of developments with the statement by the Iranian president. And if the translation is accurate, and if the term or the phrase really is full-scale war, clearly Iran is not mobilized for that, at least not yet, in terms of going on some kind of offensive campaign against its neighbors in the region, or even Israel a little further afield. And certainly Iran cannot touch the United States directly from a quote-unquote war perspective. So why make this kind of aggressive and bold comment now? As you mentioned at the top of the segment, it could be a way to send a message for the meeting tomorrow between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think they'll just, if anything, shrug it off, because clearly Iran is in a much weaker position than both the U.S. and Israel. But the fact that the statement was published on the Supreme Leader's website, I find that to be pretty fascinating, because in other times in modern history, when you had an Iranian president and the Supreme Leader, whether Ayatollah Khomeini or Khamenei, sometimes there had been daylight between those statements from the president and the Supreme Leader in terms of Iran's foreign policy, and it's always been directed by the Supreme Leader. So the fact that this really bold and aggressive statement by the president posted on the Supreme Leader's website tells me that they're in lockstep, at least in terms of the messaging, but I'm not sure there's an actual realistic or operational threat, at least right now.
And again, you're looking at that translated statement right there. As you said, it's loosely translated, but as of right now, it says full-scale war. And we've also seen other translations that say total war, which is just kind of another way to refer to it. Now, does this differ in any way from what we've heard from Iran's president's previous rhetoric about the U.S.? Because we know there's been tension there. That's nothing new. But are these statements that he's made that are this powerful previously?
Yeah, there have been other Iranian presidents, and going back previous years and decades, who also made similarly belligerent statements, but almost always those statements haven't really been backed up by threats. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Leader is the one who calls the shots for Iranian national security policy. The Islamic Revolutionary or Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps reports to him. The intelligence and security services report to him. They don't report to the president. So when Iranian presidents make these statements, they're more at the political level, but they're not really an indicator of the actual national security direction or policy of Iran, because, like I said, those decisions and the sort of organizations in Iran that carry out these national security missions, they are under the control of the Supreme Leader, not the president.
It's not quite clear where the nuclear talks stand between the U.S. and Iran. Do you think that a statement like this has any sort of impact overall on those talks, if they are still kind of ongoing behind the scenes?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of media reporting about the state of any resumed U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations, even if they're not doing it face-to-face, but through intermediaries or proxies since the summertime. Maybe there was some early indications of that, but at least the past few months, it doesn't seem like there's been much momentum. And going back to the summer with Israel's 12-day war, and then, as we all remember, the U.S. involvement with the series of strikes against the three key Iranian nuclear facilities, it's not clear what the status of Iran's nuclear program is. Is it truly set back years, if not longer? And those are the statements made by President Trump and other senior U.S. Officials. Or have they quietly been working to rebuild some aspect of their nuclear program? Probably not on the weapons side, but at least enriching fuel or preserving the fuel that wasn't struck during the campaign in the summertime. So these are all questions that are not clear to any of us on the outside looking in, and it doesn't look like there's a lot of momentum on the nuclear talks right now.
What is the significance of mentioning in his statement there the situation that took place back decades ago between Iran and Iraq, and saying that this is worse than that? What is the significance there?
Yeah, that is another interesting comment. And if your viewers remember, some perhaps don't, if they're younger, the Iran-Iraq War was a terrible, terrible war for both sides. Estimated casualties of probably at least 1 million on the Iranian side over that 8-year war, and probably 500,000 on the Iraqi side. And again, we may not know the actual numbers, but both countries suffered greatly in terms of the loss of manpower. The front lines of the war actually didn't move that far on either side of the Iran-Iraq border, but it was basically trench warfare, kind of to a degree what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine, although obviously not with the modern technology that's been going on. So the human cost of that war was terrible. I don't think that has been the case with even what Israel managed to inflict on Iran over the summertime. So that seems to be more perhaps the statement of what's going on now being worse than the Iran-Iraq war. Maybe that's just more to kind of mobilize domestic political sentiment in Iran, and to get the Iranian public to sort of rise up and sort of rally around the flag. But in terms of the cost of the war, I mean, that was a much worse going back 45 years ago, or almost 50 years ago now, versus what occurred over the summertime.
I want to go back to the statement here made by Iran's president. We know that President Trump tends to respond to things like that on Truth Social and maybe during interviews. I have a feeling he'll be asked about the comment today by reporters who meet with him there at Mar-a-Lago as he's meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. But as far as any sort of escalation, does a statement like this potentially lead to any kind of escalation in tensions between two sides, talking, of course, about the U.S. and Iran?
Well, the tensions between the U.S. and Iran and Israel are already very, very high. I don't think there's really been a de-escalation even since the summertime. So based on these very provocative and belligerent statements by the Iranian president on the Supreme Leaders website, like we talked about earlier, President Trump may respond to it with similarly forceful language. He's obviously done that in the past, but I don't think it's going to lead to an actual military showdown between the U.S. and Iran. And I would also have to believe both on the Israeli and the U.S. side for months there has been, I would have to assume, a relatively significant intelligence collection and analysis enterprise geared towards looking at what is the state of Iran post the campaign from the summertime, and if there are any indicators that Iran truly is mobilizing to be more aggressive or take offensive action in the region or against Israel.
Tensions in the Middle East just took a dramatic turn. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has declared that Iran is already in a full-fledged war with the United States, Israel, and Europe, a statement that is raising alarms across the world. Speaking in an interview published on the website of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Pezeshkian accused Western powers of trying to prevent Iran from standing on its own feet. He said, "They are besieging us from every aspect," pointing to economic pressure, sanctions, political isolation, and security threats. Pezeshkian's comments come at a critical moment. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is preparing to travel to Washington for talks with President Donald Trump, with Iran expected to be at the top of the agenda. Just months ago, Trump ordered U.S. airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, a move that escalated an already dangerous standoff between Iran and Israel. Those strikes became a turning point in what is now known as the 12-Day War, a short but intense conflict that ended with a ceasefire brokered by Trump in late June. But according to Iran's president, the war never truly ended. With Trump back in the White House and crippling sanctions reinstated, Pezeshkian says Iran is facing pressure on every front, from trade and currency to culture and security. He warned that while Iran's economy is being squeezed, expectations inside the country are rising, making the situation even more volatile. Behind the scenes, tensions are rising fast. Israel has reportedly warned the United States that recent Iranian missile drills could be masking preparations for a surprise attack. Western intelligence agencies have also detected unusual Iranian air activity, fueling concerns of an escalation. Israeli military leaders have raised these warnings directly with top U.S. commanders, signaling that the situation could spiral quickly. Pezeshkian insisted Iran is stronger today than during the 12-Day War, claiming improved equipment and manpower. He said, if the enemy chooses confrontation, they will face a more decisive response. The stakes are painfully real. In June, Israeli airstrikes and covert operations inside Iran killed more than 1,000 people, including senior military officials and nuclear scientists. Iran responded by launching hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel, killing at least 33 people. The United States later joined the conflict directly, bombing Iranian nuclear facilities on June 22nd. The big question: is this just political rhetoric or the warning sign of something much bigger? With nuclear facilities hit, missile drills underway, sanctions tightening, and
it's going to be
leaders
New
on
Year's
all
Eve.
sides
That's when they're
issuing
going to do
threats.
it.
The fear is growing that the Middle East could be inching towards a wider and far more dangerous conflict. The ceasefire may be holding, but the war of words, pressure, and preparation is far from over.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update.
Things started so simple. I was just a beginner, and the monsters were way too tough for me. I couldn't even do damage. But in that moment, I knew.
While the world remains fixed on Iran's nuclear ambitions and proxy wars in the Middle East, the country has actually been quietly preparing a far more dangerous threat across the Atlantic. Venezuela has become Iran's gateway to the Americas. Global analysts have uncovered what could represent one of the most sophisticated sanctions invasion networks and military build-ups ever documented outside the Middle East. So let's break down what's really happening, why it matters more than ever in 2025, and how this could spiral into a nightmare scenario that makes current Middle Eastern tensions look manageable by comparison. The relationship between Iran and Venezuela began pragmatically in 1960, when both nations were founding members of OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which also included Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. You'll notice that of the 5 founding members, only Venezuela was in South America, making it a vital exclave that can compete with other American nations. But the real transformation occurred in the early 2000s, under Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. These two leaders shared an anti-American rhetoric, believing they could create an alternative power structure that could challenge Western dominance, particularly that of the US as the head of NATO. Between 2005 and 2013, this vision crystallized into approximately 270 bilateral agreements worth $16 billion, covering everything from oil infrastructure to military cooperation. But here's where it gets concerning for US national security. During Venezuela's 2020 fuel crisis, when the country's mismanaged refineries were collapsing, Iran didn't just send emergency fuel shipments. It sent Mahan Air, a sanctioned airline with known ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. These flights routinely transported IRGC technicians and tech and industry components, establishing what would become a permanent air corridor between Tehran and Caracas. The payment to Iran came as 9 tons of Venezuelan gold bullion, worth approximately $500 million, which completely bypassed the global market and the US dollar system that practically directs Venezuela's currency exchange. Fast forward to 2025, and the situation has evolved far beyond economic cooperation. So let's talk about what Iran has actually built on Venezuelan soil. At Venezuela's El Libertador Air Base in Maracay, Iranian firms, including Quds Aviation, a known IRGC front company, have established a fully operational drone assembly line. And we're not talking about hobbyist FPV drones that are being retrofitted as killer frontline units in Ukraine. These facilities are producing Shahed 131 UAVs, the same models Russia has been deploying with devastating effect in Ukraine. Venezuela is essentially getting direct training and experience for producing these drones en masse, while being controlled and molded by Iran's anti-American agenda. The facility in question is located just over 1,350 miles away from Miami, across the Gulf of Mexico. And according to additional intelligence assessments, Iran is likely trying to influence countries across Central America to become the next staging ground for these drones. Those 1,350 miles might currently be too far under the current operational capabilities of the Shahed drones. All it would take is another generation or two of improvement, coupled with a favorable defense treaty with a Latin American country, to bring that distance down by a few hundred miles. Then, you might have Iranian drones within operational distance from the American mainland. And this isn't unfeasible. The Shahed 136, which is already being produced by both Iran and Russia, is estimated to have an operational range of over 1,600 miles. If Iran transfers this technology to Venezuela and keeps its iron grip on the country's underground, it can create a direct threat to the US. Of course, the military implications for drone production are just part of the story. Venezuela still needed to prop up its economy enough to be able to build these drones. And this was done through one of the largest sanction evasion operations in the world, possibly outmaneuvering what Russia is doing. Traders rebranded over $1.2 billion worth of Venezuelan Mirai crude as Brazilian bitumen blend and shipped it directly to China. Here's how they did it. Tankers like the Liberia-flagged Carina spoofed their AIS location signals while loading in Venezuela, then sailed with forged certificates of origin claiming Brazilian ports. The cargo arrives at China's Yangpu port, labeled as non-sanctioned Brazilian crude, even though Brazil's state oil company Petrobras doesn't even export bitumen blends. China simply pays for the purchase at discounted prices, owing to the fact that Venezuelan crude doesn't have import quotas. And this was just one of the many operations. In the end, Venezuelan oil exports to China jumped from 351,000 barrels per day in 2024 to 463,000 in early 2025. These revenues fund not just the Maduro regime's domestic repression, but also international disinformation campaigns targeting the US and Africa. And while the maritime shadow fleet moves commodities, the aforementioned Tehran-Caracas air corridor continues to move people in dual-use technology.
However you book your hotel, first check Kayak to see what lots of people say about where you're planning to stay.
Since 2020, Mahan Air and Venezuela's sanctioned national carrier, Conviasa, have institutionalized what appears to be a civilian passenger route. But eyewitnesses have repeatedly observed Conviasa aircraft parking at cargo ramps rather than passenger terminals at Tehran's airport. Unmanifested pallets are discreetly offloaded, which is characteristic of operations involving sensitive or undeclared cargo. Then in 2021, Mahan Air transferred a Boeing 747-300M directly to Conviasa's cargo subsidiary, Emprasur. When Argentine authorities detained this aircraft in 2022, they discovered the captain was a former IRGC Aerospace Force commander. It turned out the aircraft was being used for training missions and fleet integration. This mirrors Iran's well-documented aviation strategy in the Middle East, where civilian airlines have been used to transport military equipment, dual-use goods, and IRGC personnel to Syria and Lebanon. It would take nearly 2 years before the aircraft was transferred to the US as an attempt to start dismantling this air corridor. But beyond direct economic ties, perhaps the most alarming aspect of Iran's Venezuelan operations is the integration of Hezbollah in the country's infrastructure. In 2008, US Treasury officials reported that the Venezuelan government was employing and providing safe harbor to Hezbollah operatives. Individuals like Ghazi Nasser al-Din, who was a Lebanese Venezuelan diplomat, used their official positions to raise funds for Hezbollah and facilitate the movement of operatives into Venezuela. Nasser al-Din also arranged meetings between Venezuelan officials and Hezbollah leadership, coordinating fundraising with direct bank transfers and organized travel between Venezuela, Lebanon, and Iran. Coincidentally, this led to Hezbollah training being conducted on Iranian soil, with the proxy being partially responsible for the current Middle Eastern conflict and requiring Israel to invade Lebanon and assassinate Hezbollah leadership to force a ceasefire. One possible scenario that stems from Venezuela's complicity is issuing fraudulent passports and official documentation to Hezbollah-linked operatives. This will allow covert Iranian proxies to embed within Latin America and potentially access US territory under false identities. Unfortunately, this scenario isn't purely theoretical. Between 2008 and 2012, fraudulent passports were issued from the Venezuelan embassy in Baghdad to 173 individuals from Iran, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, many with suspected ties to terrorist organizations. Venezuelan Vice President Tarek El-Aissami, himself of Syrian-Lebanese descent, reportedly facilitated hundreds of Venezuelan passports to suspected Hezbollah members. Now, let's connect the dots to what's happening globally in 2025, starting with Iran itself and its weapons capabilities beyond drones. By July 2025, Iran had accumulated over 880 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% purity, whereas weapons-grade material requires 90% enrichment. Here's the critical detail you need to understand. Nuclear enrichment follows an inverse difficulty curve. The more enriched uranium already is, the easier and faster it becomes to enrich it further. Iran's trial deployment of advanced IR-9 centrifuges, which can theoretically reach enrichment speeds 50 times faster than older models, could shorten its breakout time to produce weapons-grade material to mere weeks. For reference, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima used only about 140 pounds of enriched uranium. Satellite imagery analyzed in November 2024 revealed new tunneling activities at the Natanz facility, suggesting preparations for even more hardened enrichment capabilities shielded up to 90 meters underground. Only the United States' GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator might be capable of reaching these depths, and even that remains uncertain. As both a preemptive and retaliatory action, the US conducted multiple strikes on Iran in June 2025 to neuter Natanz and the Isfahan Nuclear Research Center on the ground. But satellite imagery from late September showed new and repaired buildings that would suggest increased activity in Pickaxe Mountain, a facility only 1 mile south of Natanz. Iran has also successfully tested the Fateh-1 hypersonic ballistic missile, claiming speeds of over Mach 13 with advanced maneuvering capabilities designed specifically to defeat missile defense systems. With the distance between Iran and Israel minimal, Israel's Iron Dome would have mere minutes to detect and react. Coupled with the missile's course correction abilities, this represents a severe existential threat. The ballistic missile would be theoretically able to carry a nuclear warhead that Iran could feasibly produce by 2026 if its enrichment capabilities continue. This is further complicated by Russia and Iran signing a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty in January 2025, deepening military cooperation and coordinating on regional security issues. This formalized what had been an operational alliance into a strategic framework. And while you might think Russia is not a large factor in this shadow war, the military alliance shows Iran to directly siphon off Russia's experiences in Ukraine. The Shahed drones that are being manufactured at El Libertador are combat-proven in Ukrainian skies. The maritime deception tactics such as AIS spoofing, forged documentation and ship-to-ship transfer all mirror the sanctions invasion playbooks refined through years of Russian and Iranian cooperation. Throughout all this, China remains a huge factor. While China is arguably helping Russia avoid sanctions, it's also supported Iran for decades. For one, China has directly contributed to both Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear research and enrichment programs. It's also been one of the first countries to recognize the post-1980 revolutionary regime that led to Iran being sanctioned in the first place. China accounts for over 90% of Iran's crude and processed oil exports, helping the latter avoid sanctions placed on its energy industry by the US and its Western allies. With China essentially allowing Iran to remain a regional player by funding and contributing to its weapons programs, it's indirectly making things more complicated for the US. With Venezuela now acting as another of Iran's proxies, China and Russia have yet another angle through which they can conduct asymmetric warfare. Let's game out how this could unfold and the implications for each major player. Scenario 1. Coordinated multi-theater crisis. Iran could leverage Venezuela as a distraction platform while escalating in the Middle East. If China moves on Taiwan simultaneously, potentially between 2026 and 2027, based on Xi Jinping's stated timeline, the United States faces simultaneous crises in 3 theaters: the Middle East, Indo-Pacific, and its own backyard. The Pacific Fleet would need to concentrate near Taiwan. The Mediterranean Fleet would maintain pressure on Iran and support Israel. That leaves few forces to monitor and embolden Venezuela with operational Shahed drones and Hezbollah networks. NATO would also face a critical decision point. It would likely need to honor mutual defense commitments if the US mainland faces direct threats from Venezuelan-based operations. However, Russia remains a threat in Eastern Europe, and NATO has arguably set a bad precedent there by allowing the war in Ukraine to go on for practically 4 years. In the middle of all of this is Israel. If it senses that Iran could pull the trigger on creating and testing a nuclear bomb, it might launch even more preemptive strikes on Iranian facilities, triggering a broader regional war that would demand immediate US involvement. Scenario 2. Venezuela as Iran's sacrificial proxy. Iran could use Venezuela as a staging ground for long-range drone strikes into the Gulf of Mexico, targeting US maritime choke points. The Shahed 131 has an operational range estimated at around 550 miles, which isn't enough to reach the mainland. However, the US maintains several naval sites at Guantanamo Bay and across Puerto Rico, both of which are within striking distance. And remember, Venezuela might just be the starting point. If Iran develops another proxy, perhaps somewhere in Central America, its effective range increases drastically. Simultaneously, Iran escalates offensives against Israel, backed directly by Russian military support and advanced weapon systems. Russia benefits by diverting US attention, Iran achieves its strategic objective of destabilizing Israel, and Venezuela serves as the expendable triggerman that gives both plausible deniability. If US forces respond with strikes on Venezuelan facilities, which they would almost certainly have to, Iran positions this as American aggression against a sovereign Latin American nation. This plays perfectly into their decades-long narrative of US imperialism, which directly plays into China's ambitions, which can now swoop in to repair the damaged infrastructure and put the affected countries under mountains of debt while simultaneously proclaiming its famed goal toward neutrality. Given enough pressure, Venezuela might fold and allow China to start exploring its domestic oil reserves, which are considered to be the largest in the world and only hampered by Venezuela not having the economic and industrial capacity to use them. If China takes hold of this resource and manages to transport enough of it, it could theoretically bypass its need for the Malacca Strait as the primary oil tanker bottleneck. Scenario 3. The nuclear threshold. If Iran crosses the threshold to weaponize nuclear capability, which can range from anywhere between weeks or months to years, considering how few international safeguards and monitoring are in place, the world could burn due to cascading effects. Saudi Arabia has explicitly stated it will pursue nuclear weapons if Iran obtains them. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman declared in 2018, "If Iran develops a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible." Saudi officials reaffirmed this position as recently as September 2023. The UAE also has an infrastructure that could be repurposed if regional security dynamics deteriorate further. The country also has access to ballistic missiles and is running one of the largest nuclear power programs on the Arabian Peninsula. While its commitment to nuclear non-proliferation started in 2009, this stance could change if it senses enough pressure from both Iran and Saudi Arabia. Israel, widely believed to possess undeclared nuclear weapons, has also adjusted its military doctrine in response to Iran's progress to something more akin to shoot first, ask questions later. The deployment of F-351 Adir stealth fighters for long-range missions and the commissioning of Dolphin-class submarines capable of carrying nuclear missiles suggest that it could be preparing for deterrence by annihilation. With so much nuclear storage within a relatively small region and historical proclivity for conflict, it would take only one miscommunication or overreaction to start a chain of nuclear missile launches that devastates the Middle East. And even if those warheads are relatively small, they could have a profound impact on the world's economy, or spur other countries like Russia into a nuclear war of their own. Scenario 4. US decides to intervene in Venezuela. If Iran has already developed its nuclear weapons program to the point where it would take weeks to finish a bomb, Israel's current military capabilities can't penetrate the hardened underground bunkers at Natanz. Only the US has bunker buster missiles capable of reaching those depths. But a US attack on Iran would directly prove to the axis of resistance that the West sees them as a legitimate threat, which could only escalate the conflict regionally. Any attack by the US or Israel needs to essentially be an open declaration of war, one that would remove Iran's ability to prioritize research instead of defending itself. That same attack would not only degrade America's geopolitical standing globally, but would go directly against the administration's ongoing efforts to bolster internal and regional security. A wide-scale attack on Iran would require coordinated effort and incredible amounts of dedicated resources, putting strain on an economy already affected by trade tensions with long-standing partners. At the same time, Iran could inflict severe economic damage by cutting off access to the Strait of Hormuz, which is vital for international oil trade and used by Saudi Arabia as one of the largest crude oil exporters. And if the US commits forces to a Middle Eastern theater, Venezuela becomes even more dangerous as an uncontested Iranian staging ground. That means the US would also have to interfere directly in Venezuela, creating yet another crisis in the country. President Donald Trump has already authorized CIA operations in Venezuela, and the US has deployed multiple missile systems, 2 warships, and a surveillance aircraft to directly exert presence near Venezuelan waters. Trump also implied that President Maduro's days were numbered, suggesting he's actively taking a more aggressive stance against the country. Of course, none of these scenarios is certain. Everything can change from one month to the next, as the major players gain or lose on the geopolitical stage. Russia is being pressured directly by Ukraine and Europe. If it loses enough, it could back out of supporting Iran. China could then lose confidence in being the sole backer, which could either entirely aggravate Iran or pacify it completely. But while the world is trying to adjust, Venezuela is still in one of its biggest crises in history. It has the highest inflation rate in the world and faces currency collapse. Venezuela's Alba bloc has been weakening. Several member states, including Ecuador in 2018, under President Lenin Moreno, have distanced themselves from the alliance, citing Maduro's regime. Accelerating this trend through economic incentives and security partnerships could further isolate Venezuela. the regime would need Iranian support even more to maintain even basic government functions. This dependency means Maduro has every incentive to continue facilitating Iranian operations, even risky ones, in exchange for continued economic lifelines. In turn, Iran's international support comes primarily from the axis of Russia, China, North Korea, actively disrupting these networks, particularly the technological and financial flows that enable them, and degrade Iran's capability to sustain Venezuelan operation. However, the US has become increasingly unable to manage with both domestic and foreign challenges.
Guys, 3 days into this game and I have uninstalled all other games in my phone. In-game ads? Amid a series of increasingly stark warnings from Benjamin Netanyahu about Iran, the Iranian president has now escalated the rhetoric by issuing a dramatic war remark aimed squarely at the West. Masoud Pezeshkian declared that the United States, Israel, and key European powers are waging what he called a full-fledged war against Iran, accusing them of systematically trying to weaken and pressure the Islamic Republic on every front. Pezeshkian made these remarks on December 27th during an interview published on the official website of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Pezeshkian said in his interview, and I quote, "In my opinion, we are in a full-fledged war with America, Israel, and Europe. They do not want our country to stand on its feet. Our dear military forces are doing their jobs with strength, and now in terms of equipment and manpower. Despite all the problems we have, they are stronger than when Israel and the US attacked. So if they want to attack, they will naturally face a more decisive response. This war is worse than Iraq's war against us. If one understands it well, this war is far more complex and difficult than that war." Pezeshkian's remarks came at a moment when the Israeli Prime Minister was making multiple pointed statements about Iran, creating an atmosphere of escalating verbal confrontation between Tehran and Israel. On December 24th, Netanyahu's office released an AI-generated video clip to mark 6 months since the brief but intense Iran-Israel war, using stylized imagery to signal Israel's continued readiness and resolve. In the video, Netanyahu is shown sitting inside the cockpit of a B-2 stealth bomber alongside US President Donald Trump, a dramatic visual that appears to symbolize close Israeli military cooperation against Iran. On the same day, December 24th, Netanyahu also said that Israel is dealing with multiple strategic challenges, specifically flagging Iran as one of the central security issues demanding constant attention. Earlier, on December 22nd, the Israeli Prime Minister vowed a harsh response to Iran after Tehran conducted large-scale military drills, warning that any perceived provocation would be met with firm action. Notably, reports suggest that Netanyahu and Trump are expected to meet on December 29th in Florida, a high-profile encounter that could shape the next phase of Israeli coordination on Iran. Netanyahu will reportedly use that meeting to push the United States to consider renewing military strikes on Iran, arguing that Iran's activities pose mounting security risks that cannot be ignored. This all comes in the shadow of the 12-day war fought between Iran and Israel in June, a conflict that the United States later joined, dramatically raising the stakes across the wider Middle East. During that war, the US and Israel struck Iranian nuclear-related sites, and later in September, Europe's E3 group moved to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran, deepening Tehran's sense of international isolation. In a surprising move, Israeli officials recently admitted that their campaign failed to fully destroy Iran's missile program, an acknowledgement that Tehran's offensive capabilities remain largely intact. According to reporting cited by outlets like the Times of Israel, Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is roughly where it stood on the eve of war, suggesting only limited long-term damage to its stockpiles. Reports indicate that even after the 12-day war, Iran still fields around 2,000 heavy ballistic missiles, underscoring how substantial its missile forces remain despite repeated strikes. Notably, Iran's proposed 2026 defense budget surged following the June war with Israel, reaching new highs as the government redirected resources to the military and security sector. Tehran's defense and security spending has reportedly risen by about 145% compared with the previous year, a jump that officials link directly to the aftermath of the 12-day conflict with Israel. The government has said that total defense and security allocations for 2026 amount to approximately $9.23 billion, based on current exchange rate estimates used in the budget bill. Authorities have framed this dramatic surge in spending as necessary to strengthen deterrence and manage the growing array of security threats Iran faces at home and across the region.
He stood at the podium in a packed press room, the gravity of the moment evident in the rhythm of his words. We have just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large, the largest one ever seized actually. President Donald J. Trump spoke with unmistakable force, his voice carrying across microphones and live broadcasts. This was not a routine announcement. What he described was part of a rapidly unfolding international confrontation, one that had reached a pivotal flashpoint in late December of 2025. The world was watching as two powerful states, the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, appeared to square off on the open seas. The spark, as US officials described it, was maritime enforcement off the coast of Venezuela. US authorities, including the Coast Guard and naval forces, have been tracking a string of tankers suspected of moving crude and fuel in ways they say violate US sanctions. These vessels, officials contend, form part of a so-called shadow fleet, a collection of ships that allegedly conceal the origin of their cargoes and are linked to both Iranian and Venezuelan interests. The policy underpinning these actions, the Trump administration stated, was aimed at choking off revenue streams that Western governments believe support criminal networks and destabilizing actors. Yet the maritime operations began to take on a life of their own. As the US moved against sanctioned ships in the Caribbean and Atlantic, Tehran's response shifted from diplomatic protest to direct action. In a dramatic scene far from the Caribbean waters, Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval forces seized a foreign oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic waterway through which nearly a fifth of the world's traded oil supplies flow. Iranian state media released images that quickly circulated globally, the tanker silhouetted against the gleaming water, guarded by fast boats and Urd vessels. Tehran justified the seizure as a measure against smuggling, but made no secret of its symbolic weight. Officials in Tehran framed the event as a decisive countermove to US maritime pressure. A senior judicial official in Iran, Mojtaba Ghahramani, spoke with state media about the operation, saying it was a significant blow to networks that Iran claims are smuggling fuel through critical waterways. The move underscored how intertwined energy, sanction regimes and power projection have become in contemporary geopolitics. The confrontation over oil shipments and sanction enforcement has roots stretching back years. Both Iran and Venezuela have faced extensive US sanctions designed to constrain their oil industries and limit access to global markets. In turn, Tehran and Caracas have developed complex networks to keep their products moving, often through intermediaries, transshipments, altered documentation, and shifting ship flags, tactics that Western analysts have described as emblematic of modern shadow fleets. The tanker seized by US forces in early December, identified as the Skipper, was a case in point. US authorities said the ship had been under sanctions since 2022 and alleged it was part of an international network transporting oil for Iran and Venezuela. Satellite tracking data showed the vessel manipulating its transponder and frequently changing its apparent location, tactics used to evade detection, sanctions enforcement. When US Special Forces boarded the vessel, it was flying the flag of Guyana, though authorities questioned the legitimacy of that registration. Soon after, the Biden administration's Treasury Department moved to confiscate the cargo under long-standing sanctions regulations. That operation triggered swift protest from Tehran and Caracas. Iranian and Venezuelan officials decried the US action as unlawful and tantamount to piracy on the high seas. Tehran's foreign ministry and its diplomatic missions issued statements condemning what they termed a blatant violation of international maritime law, insisting that the United States had no legal basis to seize a vessel outside its territorial waters for alleged sanctions violations. Caracas echoed these sentiments, condemning the seizure as theft of the nation's sovereign resources. China's foreign ministry also piled on, denouncing the US interception of vessels as a serious violation of international law. Beijing emphasized Venezuela's right to peaceful economic relations and denounced what it saw as unilateral sanctions and maritime seizures. The comments reflected broader global unease over the scope of US enforcement actions, even among governments that do not align fully with Tehran or Caracas. At the heart of these escalating tensions was a broader strategy by the Trump administration, one officials framed in terms of national security. Washington described itself as targeting revenue streams that underwrite criminal networks, including drug trafficking and terrorism, and as enforcing legally imposed sanctions. The White House argued that unless sanctions were enforced, they would be reduced to mere declarations with no practical effect. But critics of the policy questioned the legal and diplomatic implications of such unilateral enforcement actions. They warned that intercepting and seizing vessels in international waters, especially against the protests of other sovereign states, could set dangerous precedents for freedom of navigation and create conditions for conflict that international law was not designed to handle. In Tehran and Caracas, the narrative was starkly different.
This mouse backpack is the best I've ever used.
Introducing the Mouse X Mercedes AM.
Iranian officials cited these maritime operations as further evidence of an aggressive US strategy aimed at undermining their interests. To them, Tehran's own seizure of a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz was cast as legitimate enforcement against smuggling, while American actions in the Caribbean were criminal acts on par with piracy. The statements issued by Iranian representatives were unequivocal. They framed US behavior as violations not only of maritime conventions, but of basic principles of national sovereignty. Their messaging underscored a deepening rift between Washington and Tehran that extended well beyond oil shipments and sanctions. Back in Washington, White House spokespeople countered by underscoring the legality of their actions under US law. They pointed to sanctions regimes passed by Congress and reinforced through executive action as the basis for interdictions at sea. Administration officials argued that failing to enforce those sanctions would embolden illicit actors and weaken the international sanctions regime more broadly. The backdrop to these confrontations was an already tense geopolitical climate. In the Middle East, the consequences of prolonged distrust between Iran and US partners had spilled into multiple theaters of tension, while in Latin America, Venezuelan political instability and economic contraction had created conditions that external powers have sought to exploit or contain. The maritime theatre became an unexpected flashpoint precisely because it combined elements of energy security, economic sanctions, and naval power projection. Control over shipping routes, enforcement of sanctions, and images of military units boarding large vessels all contributed to a sense of crisis that outstripped the relatively narrow legal grounds on which any of these actions were justified. Amid these developments, some analysts warned that miscalculation by any party could have serious unintended consequences. They cautioned that while legal arguments and diplomatic protests are staples of international relations, the real-world impact of detaining crews, seizing cargo, and mobilizing naval assets in contested waters could lead to confrontations neither side truly wants. For now, however, both capitals remained locked in their respective narratives. Washington emphasized rule of law and sanction enforcement. Tehran stressed resistance to what it decried as unlawful aggression. Caracas stood firmly with Iran and against US maritime actions. And far from these capitals, shipping companies, insurers, and global energy markets watch closely, acutely aware that standoffs between major powers on the high seas have ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate clash. The scene on the tankers themselves was also striking. Crews of foreign sailors found themselves caught between geopolitical forces. Some were detained temporarily by Iranian authorities. Others faced prolonged legal uncertainty as their vessels were impounded by US forces. The human dimension of sailors unsure of their fate amid rising tensions between world powers underscored the real cost of geopolitical brinkmanship. Looking ahead, diplomatic efforts would almost certainly be tested. Allies of the United States in Europe and Asia expressed concern about the unilateral nature of US maritime interdictions, even if they shared broader policy goals of pressuring Iran and Venezuela. Meanwhile, Russia and China signaled stronger alignment with Caracas and Tehran on issues of sovereignty and resistance to what they see as overreach. In Tehran, the government made clear that its own naval operations would continue to reflect its interpretation of national interests and legal prerogatives. Iranian state media continued to emphasize images of its navy in action, projecting strength and warning against what it called encroachments on its rights. In Washington, senior officials prepared for battles ahead in diplomatic forums. Including at the United Nations, where veto-holding Security Council members are likely to weigh in on maritime security and freedom of navigation. Legal experts debated whether existing conventions on the law of the sea are adequate to address the modern intertwining of sanctions enforcement and naval power. For ordinary citizens around the world, these disputes may have felt distant, but the implications for global energy supplies, international law, and the future conduct of sanctioned states have already begun to shape policy debates in capitals from London to Tokyo. What had begun as a series of seemingly isolated maritime enforcement actions had, by the close of 2025, evolved into a confrontation that touched on the core questions of sovereignty, legality, and power in the 21st century. And as each government stood by its actions and rhetoric, the watchers of the world looked on, passing every public statement, every image released from disputed waters, and every promise or threat from leaders who hold the levers of conflict and diplomacy.
Pelican Single Pass Tangential Flow Filtration, or Single Pass TFF.
That's when police treat the situation as an emergency. So in this case, investigators determined the suspect was not known to the family, at least that's what I've seen so far, which places this case is in a high-risk category and explains the urgency and why the father acted so quickly.
And it's important to note here that we don't have a final determination of if there was any kind of previous interaction, anything of that nature. There's different reports that are coming in, so I just wanted to make sure to clarify that for folks out there. Before I let you go, anything that you think it's important for parents out there to know?
I think the case is a reminder that we don't want to raise children in fear, but stranger danger, it's real. And most missing child cases, although they don't involve violent strangers, when they do, the case can escalate very quickly and can be dangerous. So what's important here is that it began as a missing child concern and later became clear how serious it was. A parent trusted their instincts, and that's really important. Technology did help, witnesses did help, law enforcement came in, the suspect was apprehended. But this shows how public safety works in layers. So having awareness at home, talking to your children, telling them not to talk to strangers, working with them to make sure that they're agreeable to keeping their location tracker on so that there's an open dialogue. So when something like this happens, they know something's wrong.
All right, Jillian Snyder there, retired NYPD officer, wears a lot of hats. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We definitely appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Josh.
And of course,
Thank you, Josh, for that interview. We're going to step away now for a 2-minute break. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. You are taking a live look at Palm Beach, Florida right now. This is where President Trump is meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky right now at Mar-a-Lago. You can see it is sunny and nice there in Florida, but some other parts of the country are getting a taste of true winter weather finally. Snow hitting parts of the Midwest and also storms expected coming up this week. Let's listen in on Fox Weather with their report on our top weather headlines for the day.
Hey, welcome into Fox Weather Live. I'm meteorologist Bane Fromme. Let's dive right into today's weather headlines. A fast-moving winter storm swinging through the upper Midwest today. It's bringing rain, snow, and gusty winds. It moves throughout the Great Lakes today before spreading rain across the Northeast later on this afternoon and into the evening. As the storm pushes across, we could see storms extend south of the front. Some stronger storms, potentially even severe storms, may develop later today in parts of the Mississippi and Ohio valleys. Cities include Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Nashville. And as the holiday weekend draws to a close, today is anticipated to be the busiest travel day for millions taking into the roads and also up to the skies. The TSA projecting a heavy traveler volume today, close to 3 million passengers expected to pass through the airports. Well, thanks for joining us here on your Sunday. Plenty to get to for this hour. We'll also be talking about this blast of cold air that's set to wipe away all of last week's warmth in the southern plains and the southeast. Some places could drop by 40 degrees or more than that. So the chill is moving right back in. But first, let's start off with this winter storm. The first flakes falling across the Rockies just yesterday. Snowplows clearing Interstate 80 in Utah. The system has now arrived across the upper Midwest, bringing snow, rain, wind, and also blizzard conditions to areas recently impacted by our previous winter storm. It's going to rapidly intensify and strengthen as it moves over the region for later on today. This will also then quickly move through the Great Lakes and today reaching into the north and northern New England by the time we get into Monday and Tuesday. So let's break this down for you. Right now, here's what we have going on. We have a lot of snow that's still impacting parts of Minnesota as well as into Iowa, Wisconsin now getting in on the snow impacts too. You'll notice here over into parts of Michigan and northern Illinois and also into southern Wisconsin, mostly just dealing with that rain. It's a chilly rain, but heavy rain at times. So we do have that flooding impact that is going to still be a possibility City. We're also seeing some snow squall warnings still impacting parts of, looks like into Kansas right now. We're seeing this for Geary County, Riley County, Shawnee, and Wabanoosie. So be aware of this. This is going to continue until 2:30 Central Time. Now, when we have these snow squalls rolling through, they move through very quickly, but we can produce gusty winds, really heavy snow at times, so that visibility really starts to go down very quickly. So be careful on the roads if you can. If you are on the roads, try and pull over or avoid being on them for just a little bit longer as this system continues to move through. Speaking of, winter weather alerts lighting up the board in the Midwest. You can see all this orange that you're seeing over into parts of Minnesota. That's that blizzard warning. We also have those into the UP of Michigan. Winter storm warnings also into effect for later on for today and also through your Monday. This is going to be for the northern parts of Wisconsin as well as northern parts of Michigan. Let's take a closer look into what's going down because we have these stronger winds that are also going to be moving into the Midwest. This strong low pressure system is allowing for those gustier winds to produce. And on top of this, we could see some severe weather farther south from this low pressure system as that front interacts with some of that warmer air. Looking ahead, for the next few hours, we're watching out for mostly just rain into the southern parts of Michigan and as well as into northern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. And you can see up to the north, that's where we have more of that wintry mix thanks to some of that colder air and some of that snow impacts too. Now, once this energy continues to track more towards the northeast, we'll be seeing this probably closer to late tonight when it heads into the northeast. You'll notice this, all of that cold air right behind this front is going to be pulled in and then creating that lake effect as that cold air goes over those warmer lake waters in Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, all of the above. We'll be seeing those lake effect snow impacts. So widespread, we could see a good 5 to 8 inches, but in areas close to the lake, we could be talking feet of snow up into the UP, getting close to 24 to 36 inches of snow, over 2 feet of snow there. Even into the northern parts of Michigan, like near Mackinac City, we could see close to almost 2 feet of snow as well. Even areas near Buffalo, getting up to a foot of snow when all is said and done on your Tuesday. Moving into Minneapolis, also kind of in the bullseye zone here. Potentially 5 to 8 inches of snow in this very populated city by the time we get through your Monday morning. Areas a little bit farther to the east could see a little bit more than that. Maybe closer to maybe a foot and a half. Now, these winter weather alerts, they also extend into the northeast. This is going to, again, continue through our Monday. We have those winter storm warnings that you're seeing here highlighted in purple. We can have that up towards Maine, as well as into parts of upstate New York. And winter weather advisories, that's going to be the highlighted areas in blue. That's the majority of the northeast. So what we have going on as we move throughout the late afternoon, early evening into the northeast, we have that wintry mix starting us off. But that low pressure system, it continues to track more towards the north, allowing for a lot more of that warmer air to build on in. So more of that precipitation will probably just be rain. That is until the cold air seeps in from the north, and we'll be watching out for that, so that could potentially be bringing in more of that snow impact once again, especially for areas close to the Great Lakes.
Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. We were just listening in on Fox Weather, giving you your weather headlines as a winter storm is slamming the Midwest and other storms heading for other parts of the country. Now, last weekend, we were telling you about a story in San Francisco. A lot of people left without power after a fire at a PG&E substation knocked out power to about a third of San Francisco residents. Now, that caused some people to have to plug in their generators and get those working.
We're going to stay on this live look here because we do want to capture all of the moments as President Trump is expected to greet Ukrainian President Zelensky any moment now. And we see that the camera now zooming in. We see President Trump walking out.
wealth. Potentially, they have great wealth. They want to get started. But there's a great economic benefit for Ukraine in what we're talking about.
President Trump, some are saying that the recent attacks in the past couple days on that Russia's staged against Ukraine shows that President Putin isn't serious about peace. What is your reaction to that?
No, he's very serious. I think, I can say that I believe Ukraine has made some very strong attacks also. And I don't say that negatively. I think we should probably have to. I don't say that negatively. I think, he hasn't told me that, but there have been some explosions in various parts of Russia. And it looks to me like, I don't know, I don't think it came from the Congo. I don't think it came from the United States of America. It possibly came from Ukraine, but I haven't asked that question. Maybe I won't bother asking. No, they're fighting a war, and we'll see what happens. But I believe it's a war that we have two willing parties, we have two willing countries that want to see it end. The people of Ukraine want it to end, and the people of Russia want it to end, and the two leaders want it to end.
Economic benefits for Ukraine. Europe is holding some billions in frozen Russian assets. Do you believe that should go to Ukraine to help rebuild, or go back to Russia?
None of that's been determined, but it'll go. It's going to go very quickly. I think we're in final stages of talking, and we're going to see. Otherwise, it's going to go on for a long time. It'll either end, or it's going to go on for a long time, and millions of additional people are going to be killed. Millions. And nobody wants that.
I think you get to a frustrating stage. When you say that you think it will either end or go on for a long time, and you say you don't have a deadline. So what are you expecting out of today's
I just think we can move very rapidly. I really feel that. We've spoken. I know you had dinner with Steve. Steve Witkoff and Jared have done a fantastic job. And everybody has. Mark has been incredible. The whole group has been, our group has been incredible. And Ukraine appreciates it, and Russia appreciates it. They both want to see it end. And we're going to get it ended. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll see you, I think, at the end, but I do think we'll call Europe also. We're going to speak to the European leaders. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm the Ted Danson who plays Royal Kingdom, and that's the Ted Danson who doesn't. My life is not awesome. Royal Kingdom is a delightful mobile game that never has any ads. Oh, I spend so much time watching ads, I feel like my whole life is one big boring ad. He's fun. Another great thing about Royal Kingdom is that you can play without Wi-Fi. Play without Wi-Fi? Wait, what? Really? That's right, Ted. Your life doesn't have to be like this. Royal Kingdom is free to download and free to play. Oh, don't be a sad Ted Danson. Download Royal Kingdom today. Yeah, that guy was a real downer. Still handsome. Oh, yes. Very.
So there you have it, President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky speaking outside the entryway at Mar-a-Lago, saying that they will be speaking with the media in just a little bit, but until then they want to speak privately with European leaders as well, talking about a 20-point peace plan that they will be discussing. And we just heard President Trump saying after this meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, he plans to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin on that same issue. So we did want to share that with you. We no longer have that live look outside of the entryway right there, but we still have this live look right here. This is one of the roads where we saw the motorcade for President Zelensky going down, and we do see that there are still some folks there on the side of the road with Ukrainian flags and American flags, as President Trump is now meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky to go over a peace plan that involves 20 different points. This comes as Russia hit the capital of Ukraine and other parts of the country with hundreds of missiles and drones on Saturday, knocking out power and heat in parts of the capital. Zelensky called it Russia's response to the U.S. brokered peace efforts. So we were hearing from President Trump describing this peace plan as not complicated, but also complicated at the very same time, saying that he is hopeful, saying that this particular peace plan helps to bolster Ukraine's economy and give the country potential wealth. So we are expecting to hear from President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky in just a little bit of time, but right now the cameras are down outside of the Mar-a-Lago estate. We, of course, will continue to monitor all of our live feeds and bring you any conversations that are open to the media as soon as we get them.
Want to escape sweaty, sleepless nights? Then reclaim your rest with a Tempur-Pedic Breeze mattress from Sherman's. You'll melt into the pressure-relieving Tempur material and experience the instant coolness of the smart.
Welcome back. Well, the U.S. approving an $11 billion arms package for Taiwan. This is the largest ever from the U.S. to Taiwan as it faces increased military pressure from Communist China. Taiwan will purchase rocket systems, drones, and anti-tank missiles and others after boosting its defense spending by $40 billion. The president of Taiwan is warning that Beijing plans to seize the island by 2027. That's the Davidson window, as we've talked about, 2027. China Ministry of Foreign Affairs says this: by aiding Taiwan's independence through arms sales, the U.S. will only end up harming itself. Any attempt to use Taiwan to contain China is doomed to fail, says the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. New images from the Taiwan Straits show China's most advanced aircraft carrier passing through the Taiwan Strait earlier this week. Joining me now is the Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I've talked about the Davidson window before. This is Admiral Davidson, Philip Davidson, who said it is likely that Beijing goes into Taiwan in 2027. And that's what Taiwan is saying as well. What do you make of this most recent aggression with China in the Taiwan Strait and telling the U.S. not to help Taiwan in any way?
Well, China was always going to complain about any arms package, but this is a very important package, as you point out. And really what it shows, Maria, is that President Trump is not afraid of the Chinese. We know this also because Trump has been surging military assets into the Taiwan Strait and as well nearby Japan. We now have 2 carrier strike groups in the region. Now, President Trump gets a lot of credit for going after China hard, but he is losing the information war because he doesn't believe it's important. And the Chinese are being able to tar him and basically say to the rest of the world that Trump is afraid of the Chinese. And unfortunately, that narrative is taking hold not only around the world, but in the United States itself. But when you look at the reality, President Trump is going after China across the board.
Yeah, he really is. Look, I've talked a lot on this program about rob, replicate, replace. That is what John Ratcliffe told me a long time ago, is the MO of China: rob, replicate, replace on Western companies. Well, this next story is really unbelievable. China's newest artificial intelligence companies, called, ready for this, MetaX. That's the name of the company, MetaX. And the other one, of course, as you know, is More Threads. Both surged in recent IPO debuts on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. MetaX claims that the performance of the C500 chip series is similar to NVIDIA's H200 chip. President Trump recently allowed the sale of those NVIDIA chips to Beijing, although the most advanced chips are still restricted. Your thoughts on these 2 companies? And I just think it's, it's an embarrassment. They named the company MetaX.
Well, yes, and that shows you the Chinese have no respect for the United States because they're being open about what they're doing. MetaX surged 693% yesterday in its IPO, and More Threads surged 400% earlier this month. The reason why these companies are so popular is not necessarily because of their products, but because everybody knows that the Chinese government is determined to make sure that there are no American or other foreign chips in China. And so everyone wants to pile into these companies. But we got to also remember one other thing. When the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, or NVIDIA's Jensen Huang says, look, we need to get China addicted to the American technology stack, that's just not going to wash because Xi Jinping is determined that there be no American products in China.
Wow. Well, look, the Chinese Communist Party does not believe in patents. They don't believe, they just take the names, MetaX. So obviously we've got Meta and we've got X in the U.S. They name one company MetaX. President Trump's push to take back some power over the Panama Canal is also hitting a wall.
This is also another pushback, aggressive move from China. It's demanding that its largest shipping company, that company called Costco, gets a controlling stake in any deal, or else.
Service announcement for all the gays. Archer just made dating a whole lot easier. So now not only can you set what it is you're looking for, whether that...
And over the weekend, President Trump launching a massive airstrike on more than 70 terror targets in Syria. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth called it a declaration of vengeance meant to eliminate ISIS. Joining me now, retired four-star General Jack Keane. And General, look, this was retaliation for the deadly attack on U.S. forces in Syria. Do you support this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very comprehensive but nonetheless limited attack, on ISIS in Syria. I mean, clearly it doesn't reflect that this organization is somehow recovering and is a major threat to the United States. The caliphate was taken away from them in 2019 by the Trump administration that existed in Syria and also in Iraq. And we've kept a small, modest force there, along with the Syrian Kurds and the Syrian Arabs, to make certain that the organization did not grow and expand and become a threat again. And that operation has been successful. This is more a reflection of a single individual who was a part of the Syrian security forces, who was inspired by ISIS. They suspected him of his radical views and were about to remove him as a security force member when this attack took place. It's more a reflection of ISIS inspiring somebody than it is of this organization growing in size and becoming a threat to the United States. The retaliation attack is appropriate to send a clear message to them and to the members of this organization that they're in danger if they move towards hurting the United States again.
All right, next one for you, General. The U.S. now pursuing a third so-called dark fleet oil tanker near Venezuela. An official telling Fox that it's trying to evade authorities by, quote, flying a false flag and under a judicial seizure order. Has there been any response from Maduro that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, this is all a pressure campaign, beginning with the demonstration of military force in the region, shutting down the narco-trafficking at sea, and beginning to take away the major revenue source that Maduro and Venezuela so depends on, the sale of oil. So here we are, we're seizing ships that are coming out of Venezuela and stopping ships from going into Venezuela. And a lot of them, frankly, Ashley, are turning around and not going near Venezuela as a result of it. So that's already starting to have some effect. I applaud the administration here that demonstrated some patience and also some persistence here. This is about forcing Maduro to voluntarily resign and leave and take the exit that President Trump has offered him, or to have the people around him who lose confidence in the fact that why are we putting up with Maduro and have all this grief brought on us and pushing him out. That is a much better option than the other options that are available, certainly the use of force, but I do believe those options are on the table as well.
Very good. Another one for you, General. White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Ukraine's President Zelensky says they held constructive talks in Florida this weekend. Do you think we're going to see any meaningful progress with Russia before the end of the year? Or going into the new year, I guess. I mean, where's the state of play on this?
Well, again, President Trump here has been really persistent in attempting to achieve a peace. And I applaud his team for working so hard at this. They use the term constructive. I mean, that's diplomatic speak for progress, but things are yet to be resolved. And that's where we are. There's three pieces to this. The 20-point plan that was discussed in Geneva a few weeks ago. The issue there is territory, and are they willing to swap territory? The second issue, and this is critical to the first one, and that's security guarantees. And that's U.S. commanding a multinational force, an air, land, and sea component to that force to make certain that Putin does not reattack. And the third piece of it is economic. It's about the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine itself. In all three of those, there's unresolved issues. So it's a work in progress. Whether we can get something done by the end of the holidays remains to be seen. Give them credit for sticking with this. Listen, my concern here has always been Russia. Ukraine wants peace. The United States wants peace. Russia has been voting for war by their actions time and time again. That has been where they are. It remains to be seen if they have changed.
Last one for you, General. Senator Lindsey Graham has a warning about Hamas. Listen to this, I'll get your comment.
Hi, I'm Macaulay Culkin, and today I'm going to introduce you to my favorite puzzle game, Royal Kingdom. You see, Royal Kingdom has no ads, and you can play it anywhere because you don't need Wi-Fi. And the best part? It's free. So download Royal Kingdom today and start the new year off right. Still got it.
Style and substance. In the GMC Sierra. Work during the GMC holiday event. Get a total value of over $8,200 on this Sierra 1500 model.
Hamas is not disarming, they're rearming. Hamas is not abandoning power, they're consolidating power. That's what the military intelligence people in Israel told me. That's what the IDF told me. That's what our own people told me. So I would urge President Trump to meet with Prime Minister Bibi next week and come up with a plan, put Hamas on a time clock. If they don't turn over their weapons and stop rearming at a date certain, I would unleash Israel on them.
So, General, is Hamas trying to rebuild their ranks, and can they?
Yeah, well, certainly they're doing everything they can to do that. There's about 5,000 of them left. A lot of them are teenagers that they've recruited, to be sure. They still have some seasoned fighters there. And yes, they want to rearm, they want to re-equip, they want to stay in power. That's a fact. President Trump said the last time that President Netanyahu was in the White House, even though they were announcing, remember, the 22-point deal, they said if Hamas doesn't disarm, and demilitarize, then certainly we would support Prime Minister Netanyahu going in there to finish it. The diplomatic effort is underway. I don't think anyone's going to stop that effort for the time being to see if it can work. All the signs are that there's not going to be a country that's willing to step up and disarm Hamas, given the fact that they're unwilling to do so. So I think down the road here, certainly, Prime Minister Netanyahu should be given a green light. He'll certainly want that at a time of his choosing, to be able to go in there and finish the job once and for all. The good news is right now, so our viewers understand, Hamas does not have the capability right now to seriously attack Israel in any way, shape, or form. That just doesn't exist. So that is a good thing. But we don't want them to get that capability once again.
Exactly. We'll leave it there. General Jack Keane, terrific stuff as always. Appreciate your knowledge, and Merry Christmas to you, General.
The money to be paid directly to the people so that they can buy their own health insurance, which will give far better benefits at much lower cost. By the way, what I told you about buying the drugs at this massive dollar discount, it's like from where it is, that's going to have a huge impact on the cost of health care.
That's President Trump in North Carolina on Friday, pledging better health benefits at lower cost. The president planning to meet with major insurance companies in a bid to lower prices further, saying that it could be another way to cut costs as millions of Americans face a potential increase in premiums in the new year. Congress, of course, adjourned last week without extending the Affordable Care Act subsidies. They are set to expire next week. Joining me now is Maryland Congressman Andy Harris. He is the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So are you expecting blowback in the new year when you all come back January 5th by the Democrats who wanted those Obamacare subsidies extended to the extent that they might stage another government shutdown when funding runs out at the end of January?
Well, Maria, I think what this whole argument has shown is that Obamacare failed. It failed miserably. It was designed to fail. It was supposed to lower premiums. The premiums went up. The health insurance companies make tens of billions of dollars because they're actually incentivized to raise premiums and spend more money on Obamacare policies. The bottom line, it doesn't work. We need to provide relief to the 150 million Americans who are on ERISA-style plans, especially those with small employers. We need to make sure that they have a wide range of options at a lower cost. That's what we're going to concentrate on when we come back in January.
So what are you going to do? What's the plan?
Well, the thing is you have to increase options. So before we left, for instance, we expanded association health plans. It's an idea where you can pool risk in larger pools that may not be available to small employers and employees. We have to make sure that the employers can put money into what are called a choice account so that the average person, the average employee can go and choose their own plans from a wide variety of market-based options without extensive essential health benefits, which Obamacare has. It drives up the cost. There are many ways, market-driven ways, to reduce healthcare costs and healthcare insurance costs in the United States.
Yeah, and certainly the president's finding a lot of them in a short period of time. But I want to get your take on when you expect us to really feel the impact of the big, beautiful bill. I mean, President Trump has been promising bigger tax refunds for Americans due to the changes made in the bill. And I spoke with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on this program last week. He's expecting 3-4% growth in the first half of the year. He says we should expect substantial refunds in the first quarter. Watch this.
Let's go back to one big per household, depending on the number of workers.
What about that, Congressman? What's most impactful from the big, beautiful bill, in your view, in terms of economic policy?
Well, certainly increasing the standard deduction increased the tax refunds that a large percent of families are going to get. Now, we have no tax on tips, which is great. The lowering of overtime certainly incentivizes economic activity. And that's important. To get this economy going again from the Biden years, we're going to have to incentivize economic activity, and that's exactly what the One Big Beautiful Bill did.
I'll tell you, it has some Wall Streeters expecting some serious growth in the GDP. I spoke with Louis Navellier last week on this program, who's been a growth investor, has been very successful for a lot of years. Listen to what he said. Here it is. What is your assessment of the macro story? How do you want to be invested in 2026, Louis?
We're going to hit 5% GDP growth. We're running 3.5 to 3.8 now, but they're going to be revising it up because the trade numbers, the trade deficit's the lowest in 5 years. The exports the second highest ever recorded with low oil prices. So that's going to have big upward revisions. Obviously, a lot of the growth was onshoring, but even and the data centers. But if you look at the data centers, their order backlogs are up 20% quarter-over-quarter. So we're going to enter the new year with we're going to hit 5% GDP growth.
5% GDP. Do you buy that?
Well, that's pretty optimistic, but we don't need 5% GDP. If we have 4% GDP growth, we'll be doing fine. Again, we'll increase revenues, we'll decrease the deficit, and of course get the economy going and get the economic sentiment going ahead of this year's elections. That's very important, and I think if we get economic growth, the Republicans will do just fine in November.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to believe if you're talking about 5% GDP growth, even if it's just for a time, for one quarter, that would be a very strong backdrop to buy stocks in the new year. And perhaps that's part of the optimism we're looking at with the big, beautiful bill's impact. The Department of Health and Human Services, meanwhile, announced a series of proposed regulatory actions carrying out the president's executive order, which bans what they refer to as sex-rejecting procedures on children, gender reassignment surgeries, Congressman. You're a physician. You're a member of the GOP Doctors Caucus. What is your reaction to this?
Well, the GOP Doctors Caucus absolutely supports what the administration is doing. We think it's actually been ridiculous that we do gender-rejecting treatments on children, on minors. These are permanent. Some of them are very permanent. Obviously, surgery is. And to do that on a minor, we think it's just wrong. So we support the Health and Human Services Secretary in this announcement.
Well, that is just extraordinary, that we are even discussing the idea that we would do gender reassignment on children, Congressman. How the heck did we get here?
I don't look. It's a woke environment in Washington. The Biden years were incredibly woke, and that accelerated under the Biden years. It's about time to tap the brakes on that, and that's exactly what the department did last week.
Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you so much. Happy holidays to you, and we'll keep following your work, sir. Thank you. Andy Harris joining us this morning.
It's Coast Guard seizing a second oil tanker off the Venezuelan coast and now is hunting a third, U.S. officials say. Now, joining us now for reaction to this is American Majority CEO Ned Ryan. So, Ned, oil prices rose on the news that that second tanker was intercepted. We're not talking about a lot of oil supply coming out of Venezuela. What warranted that price increase?
Well, it does have a ripple effect. I would say it doesn't seem like much, Edward, but for some places like Cuba, devastating. Existential crisis. I mean, Cuba, if Venezuela's oil, about 70% of it's embargoed, and these oil tankers are trying to get to Cuba. About 40% of Cuba's energy comes from Venezuela. They're in the toughest economic crisis they've had since Castro took power in 1959. If they lose 40% of their power, energy from Venezuela imports, I mean, it might even bring down the Cuban regime. So there's a whole host of domino effects from seizing these tankers. And then it leads into, what do Russia and China do after this in regards to propping up Cuba if they're even able to do that? So there's a whole host of issues from seizing these tankers that people need to understand.
And we'll get back into that in a second. There's a pushback against the president's actions on Venezuela. Here's what Republican Senator Rand Paul said. Listen to this.
I consider it a provocation and a prelude to war, and I hope we don't go to war with Venezuela. Look, at any point in time, there are 20, 30 governments around the world that we don't like that are either socialist or communist or have human rights violations. We could really literally go through a couple dozen, but it isn't the job of the American soldier to be the policeman of the world.
This mouse backpack is the best I've ever used.
Introducing the Mouse X Mercedes AMG F1 team bag. The Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team approached us and gave us our biggest product challenge ever. Take your most advanced backpack and make it lighter, more functional, durable enough for a 24-week season, but still seriously protected. Finding the optimal balance in every feature is insanely hard, but we think we've cracked it. At its core is 840D ballistic nylon, a material born from military innovation for extreme demands. Its tightly woven basket weave structure provides outstanding resistance to tears and abrasions, yet lightweight enough to strike the ideal balance between strength and practicality. Finished with a tough coating of polycarbonate and 2 layers of polyurethane to make it seriously water-resistant. But we didn't stop there. We added our signature Aerofoam technology, a non-Newtonian fluid made up of intelligent hydrogen bonds, which form and break to absorb the energy which would otherwise damage your device. To create a backpack that's lightweight without compromise. This isn't just a backpack. It's an essential tool for one of the world's most relentless teams. Quick access external pockets and intuitive compartments ensure everything from laptops to essential tools stay secure, organized, and within reach. From durability to functionality, every element of the backpack is engineered to perform just like the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. Designed with precision, built for champions. This is Mouse, and this is Balance.
Absolutely wild.
Sherman's annual New Year sale is going on now, and 2026 is going to be extra special. We're kicking off our 50th year in business with a celebration unlike any before, where you can get savings up to 50% off store-wide. Whether you want to remodel the kitchen, refresh the living room, or get a better night's sleep, now's the time to buy. We only turn 50 once, and this deal doesn't last forever. Shop Sherman's annual New Year sale and save up to 50% now through January 4th.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham seems to be on board with this. Listen to this.
President Trump promised to secure our nation from the scourge of narco drug trafficking. The kingpin in our backyard is Maduro in Venezuela. They're poisoning America. I applaud President Trump of trying to bring down this narco-terrorist state in Venezuela run by Maduro. They're bad news. Maduro's days are numbered.
So what do you think? Is this the way to get Maduro out without putting American troops in harm's way?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's two things that are funding the Venezuelan regime, Maduro's regime. It's obviously exporting oil and obviously the narcotics. So if we start to squeeze him on both fronts, I think his days are numbered in Venezuela. So I find it kind of an ignorant statement by Rand Paul. I actually applaud, and I consider myself firmly in the America First approach to foreign policy. I applaud the Trump administration for what they're doing with Venezuela. It is a resurrection of the Monroe Doctrine, in which we are to control the Western Hemisphere, not allow Russia or China or anybody else to have undue influence in our hemisphere. So I think this is the right approach.
Yeah, Ned, I appreciate it. I'm going to have to cut this a little bit short. The president is speaking.
There are going to be substantial refunds to working American households in the first quarter. We're going to see very substantial 100 to 150 billion of refunds in the first quarter go directly to Americans' pockets.
What we're seeing is that the people who have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, all of those folks didn't have their forms changed this year because the IRS didn't have time to do it since we passed the bill in July. And so they're going to get huge tax refunds in the first and second half of the year.
Under these cuts, many families will be saving between $11,000 and $20,000 a year, and next spring is projected to be the largest tax refund season of all time.
Well, the Trump administration out in full force, touting the largest tax refund for American families in history come 2026. The White House predicting Americans will be saving thousands of dollars on the back of new investments into America. The big, beautiful bill making the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. Joining me now is the first CEO of the Internal Revenue Service and the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration, Frank Bisignano. Frank, great to see you again. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
So what about this refund? The president says it's going to be the best refund season ever. What should we expect?
Well, we should expect exactly what the president said, as always happens. And, the great leadership of the Treasury Secretary has positioned us to be able to deliver in a whole bunch of ways for America. You're going to look at probably 94% plus of middle-class Americans getting a boost. You'll look at tax rates coming down and getting the benefit going forward. You see all our Social Security recipients getting up to a $6,000 benefit, as he committed to the benefits of Social Security not being taxed. It'll be the biggest refunds that we've ever seen. And it's all, because of the president's leadership and the Treasury Secretaries under one beautiful bill, which is unparalleled. Obviously, we also have the Trump accounts, which we were fortunate to unveil and continue to communicate, and that'll be ready for July 4th. And you see great Americans like Michael Dell contributing to it. So we're just blessed and fortunate to have the president's leadership and the Treasury Secretaries and have the ability to execute on it.
Absolutely, Frank, and I'm glad you mentioned the Trump accounts, because the IRS adding a new form allowing legal guardians to sign up for new Trump accounts for eligible U.S. citizens. The Trump accounts feature a $1,000 investment into stocks and ETFs for American citizens born between 2025 and 2028. I love this idea, Frank. The money remaining tax-free until withdrawal at age 18, with contributions allowed from employers and parents. Frank, this is so important because it teaches kids how to save and invest from a very young age. I would imagine it's going to have an effect on the entire country and our financial independence.
Yes, I think it's one of the most amazing pieces of tax work ever done. And if you think about it, $1,000 today will be worth $500,000 at age 60. Remember, Treasury will be funding
$1,000 in the pilot program during this administration for newborns. I have to say my favorite part is the form that IRS has put together with the direction of Treasury, 4547. That'll be the form. Guidance will be out on it, and we plan on being prepared on July 4th to execute against the Trump accounts.
I love that. 4547 is great. So, Frank, is there anything that you can tell us about our taxes this year, given the big, beautiful bill? Is there anything that we should be doing differently, that we should understand about the impact of the big, beautiful bill in 26?
Well, I think it's a technical process, and expectations should be that in most categories, people will get a benefit, and if you're not seeing that occurring, I think it's important to spend time and go through it. You know, with the middle class, like I said, 90+% getting a tax benefit. It'll also affect your deductions in the following year in 26, and I think it's important to take a look at that also.
Frank, the New York Post is reporting that IRS criminal investigators played a pivotal, important role in tracking down the Brown University shooter. Wow, congratulations to your team. They ultimately led the FBI and other law enforcement agencies right to the shooter. The IRS criminal investigation team began combing through his financial records after a homeless Reddit poster hero named John helped authorities identify who turned out to be Claudio Neves Valente. The suspect was proven difficult to trace after he was identified because he used European SIM cards and a gizmo that made it harder to track phones. But a senior official told the Post that at that point the criminal investigations team became involved and determined where he had obtained the storage facility in which he was ultimately located. Once the location was identified, they issued an alert to the FBI with the information on where he could be found. Frank, what can you tell us about your incredible team that helped find this shooter?
You know, yesterday I had the opportunity to congratulate the approximately dozen people who some volunteered on the ground as soon as it occurred to go there and engage while the shooter was there. And those are signs of all the great Americans we have working within the federal government. I also would say under Treasury Secretary Bessent, he had made it very clear that we will always deploy against missions using all the skills we have in the criminal investigation unit and the compliance unit. And people deployed, people engaged and worked. You know, in this government, we work across the government very, very well because of the leadership of President Trump and encouraging teamwork, and we were able to play our part as helping the investigation and actually finding the location.
That is incredible. I love to see a whole of government where each area can actually pitch in, but we weren't expecting the IRS to do this great work, and your team did it. Thank you to your team for that. Commissioner, the Office of the Inspector General just completed an audit of the Social Security Administration, finding improvements under your leadership. Your staff served 68 million callers. That is an increase of 65% from last year. Frank, congratulations. We knew your resume going into this would be so perfect to actually clean things up. What are your priorities going into the new year, Frank?
Well, I think first of all, as you can see here, I have the Inspector General's report, and you know, it's right here. And I just read the first paragraph. SSA's publicly reported National 800 number of telephone metrics were accurate, and its overall telephone service performance improved in full year 2025. In full year 2025, SSA served either by SSA employee or automation 68 million callers, as you said, a 65% increase. This audit was derived because Senator Warren refused to acknowledge the work being done by the good career people of Social Security. And I brought to her office a three-level down manager who, Tiffany Countess, who runs the phone centers, and she explained it to her, and she did not want to believe it. So we agreed to have an audit. And she continued saying the phone service was a mess. The audit was done by the Inspector General and proved that we served more Americans, 65% than the last administration. We also answered the phone significantly more timely and drove wait times in field offices down and drove disability claims pending down by 35%. So it was quite satisfying to have the truth told, even though the senator will never want to tell the truth.
Well, I'm really happy about that. So, Senator, if you're watching, thank you for the audit, okay? Thank you for the audit so that we could actually come out and talk about all the results of it. Frank, that's called leadership. And you are great to be here this morning. We appreciate your leadership. And, of course, I appreciate your friendship for all of these years, Frank. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I wish you a blessed Christmas and your family, Frank. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Hey, Minnesota, have no fear. Attorney General Keith Ellison is here, apparently saving taxpayers from the now notorious scammers only a day late and a couple of $1 billion short. Listen.
Scammers think Minnesotans are easy targets. They are wrong.
When scammers go after our seniors, students, or families, I step in fast and we shut them down.
This year, I fought predatory lenders, student loan scams, fake utility callers, and online frauds that steal people's savings.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned oil company focused on unleashing American oil from North Dakota and Montana. We've already sold over 2.9 million barrels, creating steady jobs for hard-working folks chasing the American dream. You can share in our success by investing with Phoenix Energy and get 9 to 13% annual interest through our Regulation D 506C bond offering. Join our next investor webinar to learn more about Phoenix Energy.
The self-dubbed savior may want to talk to the state's mayors because nearly 100 of them have penned a scathing letter to Minnesota leadership flagging that, quote, fraud, unchecked spending, and inconsistent fiscal management in St. Paul have trickled down to our cities, reducing our capacity to plan responsibly.
Joining us now is National Review Editor-in-Chief Rich Lowry and podcast host Ben Ferguson. Gentlemen, great to see you. Rich, this is just dripping. It's not ironic. It's just fraud. The fraud continues. His fraud, Ellison's fraud, and the governor's fraud is that they were actually complicit in the fraud that went on. Ellison was caught on tape dealing with some of the fraudsters and then later got campaign funds from them. I mean, it's just that the governor himself was berating whistleblowers who were warning him about the fraud going on for years, literally for years, and he didn't listen. I mean, that's the fraud here.
Oh, absolutely. This is so galling on so many levels. Estimated number now up to $9 billion. That's almost the entire annual GDP of Somalia. You had fraud tourists knowing that Minnesota was an easy mark. So if you wanted to fraud the taxpayer, you went there to take advantage of the opportunity. And this is a classic, David. You know, we're old enough to be old Tom Wolfe fans, but he wrote a book called Mau Mauing the Flag Catchers, and that was a idiosyncratic way to say Mau Mauing was using racial politics to get what you wanted from City Hall and from city officials. And that's part of what happened here, because when the initial suspicions arose, you had these organizations saying, well, you better not ask questions about us because we're minorities and that's wrong and racist and we'll sue you and we'll smear you in the press. And it apparently did work for some time to keep this scam going. Thank goodness has now been stopped, but it's the work of heroic federal prosecutors out there, not the state officials.
But Ben, I just want to highlight, going back to this fraud, which was just so terrible. It's been called the worst fraud related to COVID in the country. The funds were actually meant to feed children, help adults who were recovering addicts, help disabled adults just get by and live day to day, and yet it became a target for fraud. And as if having the federal prosecutors discover this, uncover it, hold folks accountable is not enough. Apparently the mayors in the state now don't have enough faith in their own state leaders that they are additionally pleading in that letter today, please take this seriously in St. Paul in their state capital.
Yeah, look, I think what you're seeing from this governor is he's actually in on it. I think he knew the fraud was going on. I think he was too afraid of losing votes in the Somali community. That's why he deliberately looked the other way. And that's why he's a part of the cover-up now. He's not trying to expose this or lock anybody up. That's why he put out this ignorant tweet. It said, quote, "Scammers thought Minnesotans were easy targets. They were wrong. From student loan scams to fake utility callers, we shut them down this year." I go back to what Rich said. I can literally give you 9 billion reasons why that tweet is a lie. And if you have a man in charge of a state who is sitting there covering up the corruption, it's because he's a part of it. And he doesn't want to lose votes in the Somali community. I agree that part of this was the issue of racism, right? You can't question us. We're going to say you're racist. But what Democrats in the leadership in Minnesota, they clearly made a calculated political decision. We do not want the money to stop going, even if it's going to terrorist organizations overseas, because we can't lose the entire Somali community vote. It's too big. It's too important for us on election day. It is too powerful. Yeah. So what you're witnessing now is the bigger part of the cover-up. What did they know? When did they know it? And how much were they actually in on it? That's the question I want to
And it's happening all over America. I mean, we don't want to just focus on Minnesota. We had, Rich, I had somebody on, I did Kudlow today. I had an assemblyman saying it was happening in New York as well with even more money. So, I mean, this is a scandal that's going to gain legs and move in virtually every corner of the United States. But meanwhile, speaking of New York, Zohran Mamdani, our Marxist mayor here, is apparently going to be sworn in by Letitia James and Bernie Sanders. I mean, if in fact what you and I think is going to happen, he's going to run out of money, as all socialists do. The whole house of cards collapses. You're going to see those pictures all over America, and it's going to doom any socialist who wants public office in this country again.
Yeah, apparently his ambition here is to be sworn in by some of the worst, most ridiculous politicians in America. Where's AOC? Where's Ilhan Omar? Where's Jasmine Crockett? Why are they getting in on this too? But look, I'm with you, David. He's either going to fail to enact his agenda, and New York will dodge a bullet, or he'll succeed in enacting his agenda, and it's going to be very bad for New York City, and he'll fail that way.
If you want to buy Bitcoin fast and easily, you should get Kraken. This platform has over 275 cryptocurrencies. You can on-ramp your funds super easily and start trading fast. The fees are low. They have robust security, approved by experts like Kitboga. You can even set recurring orders and set your limit price.
So no more funny. Join Kraken today.
My name is Dick Singer, and I've been a visited chair since 2003, and I am in love with what I do. You can't put a value on what the chair brings to the member community.
Ben, it struck me when I heard, especially the Letitia James part, Zohran Mamdani just went down to the Oval Office and had kind of a play nice meeting with President Trump, where it seemed like they were at least going to try to get along, right? For the sake of New York, maybe, for nothing else. And now he's going to get sworn in by Letitia James, who did everything in her power to go after President Trump. What is that kind of forecast for what New York City will be like under Mamdani?
Look, I think it's forecasting two things. One, we're coming after anyone that we don't like, and we're going to use the law and do it politically. That's why James is up here with me. If we don't like you, you are not welcome here in New York. This is what socialists, communists, and Marxists do. And this is a cautionary tale. You only need 50 plus 1% to win an election. And if you can run off the same voters, which is, I think, part of their plan, you can have a stranglehold on New York City. Same thing happened in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. People were tired of being shot. They were tired of the failing schools. So as soon as you had the resources to get out, you moved to the suburbs. Same thing happened in Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit. And I think that's what they're going to try to do here in New York City. That's why the president wanted to meet with him. And so unfortunately, socialism's coming to New York City, and I'm not sure you're ever going to get rid of it.
Well, they can't print money. And when the garbage strikes begin, I've been here before when that happens, it doesn't last that long before there's a change in government. Remember, even liberals voted for Mayor Giuliani when they saw the way his policies actually work compared to the predecessors. So I think things will change. It's just going to be a bad period.
I hope you're right.
Rich Lowry, Ben Ferguson, good to see you both. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, guys.
But first, the hot topic of the hour. New figures detail the results of the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal migration and the removal of criminals from the country. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services telling Fox News Digital, since President Trump's second inauguration,